Montgomery, Alabama, fall 2014. Maple Lane was as quiet as ever. Lawns trimmed to perfection, warm amber porch lights glowing against old colonial windows. At house number 82, neighbors often saw a beautiful black woman with neat curly hair step out every morning in a modest dress and a gentle smile. Her name was Vanessa Price. People said she was lucky to have married David Price, a kind, soft-spoken white man who worked at a major insurance company and never missed a chance to praise his wife at neighborhood gatherings. Vanessa is like a black pearl in a sea of white houses, the neighbors joked. But no one knew that the pearl was beginning to crack. David left early and came home late, devoting himself to work. Vanessa, on the other hand, stayed home, lonely, restless, and hungry for something David no longer gave her. His kindness, his fidelity, his decency, in a strange way, made her suffocate. She craved something wild, dangerous, untamed. Not the polite, picture-perfect love scene in heart medicine commercials. One late afternoon, while Vanessa was watering the plants, the man next door, Tyrone Mills, walked over, shirtless, his skin slick with sweat under the Alabama sun. He smiled and asked to borrow the hose. Vanessa looked at him for a long moment before handing it over, their fingers brushing. A brush of fingers the first time, text messages the second. The third was flesh on flesh. It started with secret rendezvous in the garage, the laundry room, even the couch when David was away on business. But Tyrone wasn't just a fling. He had a record, jail time, drug charges, and more importantly, he wanted money more than Vanessa wanted lust. One night, under a ceiling heavy with silence, Vanessa whispered into the darkness, "You know how much insurance money I'd get if David died?" Tyrone looked at her. Then he smiled, and that smile made the room colder than the freezer in the basement. Murder, like everything else in their lives, began with a smile. Tyrone lived alone in the house next door. He didn't seem to have a stable job, yet he always had cash to spend, drove a new pickup truck, and had a steady flow of strange women coming and going at night. The neighborhood kept their distance from him, everyone except Vanessa. Every time she stepped outside, she'd catch Tyrone's eyes watching her over the fence, hungry, raw, almost vulgar. And strangely, Vanessa never looked away. She stood there and let his stare burn through her. Their relationship started with lingering glances, then anonymous texts, followed by accidental touches while carrying groceries together. And finally, heated sex in the pitch-dark garage. Vanessa had considered stopping. But each time David held her with his gentle embrace, she felt disgusted, as if covered by an invisible layer of ice. She craved violence, flesh, something primal and electric. And Tyrone gave her all of it. One night, after making love, Vanessa lay on top of him, breathless, and asked, "Have you ever killed anyone?" Tyrone laughed. "Why you a skin?" "Just curious," she replied, her lips still slick with his sweat. "Not yet, but if I had to, I wouldn't mind." The answer hung in the cramped room, echoing like a prelude to hell. When David returned from his business trip the next day, Vanessa was waiting, with a warm smile, a home-cooked meal, and a murder plan already written in her head. 3 months earlier, David had signed a $750,000 life insurance policy, part of a new internal benefit program offered by his company. He even took Vanessa out for dinner to share the good news, telling her, "No matter what happens, you and any future kids will always be taken care of." Vanessa held his hand that night, smiling, though a chill shot through her heart. She had no children with David. They had tried. 3 miscarriages later, she had given up. David still held on a hope. Vanessa no longer believed, not in marriage, not in love, and now not in the survival of her husband. Once she learned the policy's value, she began studying its fine print. She carefully read the documents David had carelessly left on the dining table. No body recovery required. Disappearance not excluded, as long as suicide wasn't proven. Claim eligibility, 30 days after the insured went missing. Vanessa folded the file and placed it back exactly as it was. Her heartbeat stayed steady. No panic, no hesitation, just the cold focus of someone playing chess, and seeing the checkmate coming in just a few moves. That night, after David showered, Vanessa walked in with a glass of red wine. "I added a little herbal blend. It'll help you sleep," she whispered, lips like velvet. David kissed her on the forehead, never knowing that the wine in his hand was the gateway to death. That night, a light rain fell. Droplets tapped gently on the rooftop, forming a sleepy rhythm. David finished his glass of wine in 2 gulps, suspecting nothing. Minutes later, he began to stagger, his eyelids drooping as though something were pulling him into a silent abyss. Vanessa helped him to bed, gently pulled the blanket over him, and stroked his hair like a loving wife. Then she stood, pulled out her phone, and typed one line. "Come now. It's time." Less than 10 minutes later, Tyrone arrived, black raincoat, leather gloves, and a canvas bag weighed down with tools. He didn't speak. Neither did she. There was no need. The crime had been planned for months. Now, it was time for execution. David lay unconscious, breathing heavily. Tyrone bound his limbs with nylon cord. Vanessa watched without shedding a tear. The white man who once loved her, who once believed she was everything, now lay before her like a corpse awaiting disposal. Tyrone swung a rubber mallet at David's skull, hard enough to cause brain trauma, but not death. David groaned, weak and dazed. Blood seeped down the side of his face. Vanessa turned away, not from fear, but because she wanted to remember that sound forever. The plan was to dispose of the body at the junkyard where Tyrone worked part-time. The facility had an industrial metal furnace used to melt scrap, but it could just as easily melt a human body. They wrapped David in a thick tarp, hoisted him into the back of a pickup, and drove off into the rainy night. No cameras, no witnesses. Vanessa wore a hoodie, blood still drying on her fingertips. The furnace roared to life. A single muffled hiss echoed from within as the body was devoured by flame. Only one half-burnt tooth remained, buried in the ashes and twisted metal. Vanessa stared into the fire and whispered something no one could hear. "It's done." 3 days later, Vanessa walked into the police station to report her husband missing. She looked worn down, her eyes slightly puffy, wrapped in a gray sweater and a scarf like a grieving wife trying to hold herself together. She told the officer on duty that David had left for a business trip the previous weekend, but this time he hadn't come back. "I've been calling him for 2 days. No texts, no return calls. He's never done this before," she said, her voice catching. The officer took notes and asked the usual questions. Did David have a habit of disappearing? Any recent arguments? Anyone threatening him? Vanessa answered calmly and clearly, each word sounding well-rehearsed. She'd practiced this a dozen times in front of the mirror. Every gesture, her trembling hands, her teary eyes, was perfectly timed. But while the surface looked flawless, the machinery of investigation had already started turning underneath. Detective Harold Collins, a seasoned investigator with 30 years under his belt, was assigned to the case. He wasn't the kind of man to be swayed by teary eyes or polished lies. He'd seen too many missing husband cases, some of them staged by the wives themselves. What caught Collins' attention immediately was this. Vanessa never asked what the police would do next. She didn't push for answers. She didn't seem scared that David might be hurt or dead. She simply gave the facts and left. A week passed. Still no sign of David. No phone signals. No bank activity. No witnesses to his last whereabouts. Vanessa kept up the act. She posted about David on Facebook. She went on TV, begging for help. She cried in church with candles flickering behind her. Every performance was captured. Every scene painted her as a desperate wife clinging to hope. But then, a rumor changed everything. A neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, who lived across the street, came to the station with a small detail. "I remember a black pickup truck parked in front of her house for a long time that night. It was raining, but I swear someone was standing by the back door for over half an hour." Collins started digging deeper. He pulled security footage from nearby streets. A car washed 2 blocks away caught a glimpse of a black pickup truck carrying something long and covered in tarp. Driving west, toward the town scrapyard, on the very night David vanished. The next morning, Collins visited the scrapyard. A cold pile of gray slag still sat inside the furnace chamber. A forensic technician was called in. They sifted through the ashes and found a half-burnt human tooth. 3 days later, DNA results confirmed it belonged to David Price. House number 82, once just another quiet home, had now become the epicenter of a murder investigation. Vanessa, unaware that everything was crumbling around her, was applying makeup for a prayer vigil for the husband she had already watched burn. Meanwhile, the police had secured a warrant to search her house. And in his notepad, Collins wrote a single line. The victim is not missing. The victim has been destroyed. Less than 2 weeks after David was reported missing, Vanessa hosted a small party at her house. Her reason? To stay optimistic and keep friends close during hard times. She even invited a few of David's co-workers, some neighbors, and Tyrone. House number 82 lit up that night. Glasses filled with red wine. Soft jazz floated from the corner speaker. Vanessa wore a red dress, bold lipstick, and curls carefully done, as if she were celebrating a birthday. No one, except Mrs. Jenkins, found it strange. Most thought, maybe she's just trying to stay strong. But to Detective Collins, watching quietly from a distance, that night looked like a victory feast thrown by a killer. While the guests raised glasses, the forensics team was silently searching the house. Acting under a sealed warrant, they entered the shed and garage while Vanessa was away, careful not to trigger suspicion. And there, hidden in a gap above the storage ceiling, they found a blood-stained leather glove, a clump of short, light brown hair wrapped in duct tape, and a handwritten sheet detailing David's weekly schedule. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a blueprint, planned, precise, and cold-blooded. At the party, Tyrone arrived late. White shirt, jeans, and a cheap bottle of wine in hand. When he walked in, his eyes met Vanessa's, and for 1 second they locked. 1 second, but enough for anyone observant to know something was wrong between them. They avoided standing too close all evening, but the eyes they betrayed everything. A passing hand gesture. The way Vanessa lightly traced her neck with a finger when she saw him watching. All too intimate, all too staged. And in the corner of the room, Mrs. Jenkins watched in silence. She held a glass of wine, but didn't drink. Her hand pressed against her chest, as though her heart were warning her of something dark. After the party, she picked up her phone and called Collins again. This time, she said a line he would never forget. "They're not grieving, Mr. Collins. They're celebrating." The next morning, police summoned Tyrone for questioning. Not under arrest, just a conversation to assist the investigation. But a few rounds in, he began to slip. Defensive tone, contradictory details. Most of all, he claimed he wasn't anywhere near the area the night David disappeared. The camera footage, of course, told a different story. Meanwhile, Vanessa still knew nothing. She went shopping that afternoon, relaxed, as though life had just turned a new page. But that page was about to end. Slowly, deliberately. And no matter how hard you scrub it, blood always leaves a trace. At the Montgomery Police Department's forensics lab, a small object lay carefully placed in a stainless steel tray. A charred human tooth, stained with soot and embedded with flecks of melted metal. It had been recovered from the ash pile inside the industrial furnace at the scrapyard on the town's west side. The same place Tyrone had once worked part-time. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. This might be the final clue to confirm David Price's fate. 3 days later, Detective Collins received a sealed envelope at his desk. He opened it slowly, eyes scanning the top line. DNA result confirmed. Tooth sample matches David Price's genetic profile. Silence filled the room. Collins leaned back in his chair and exhaled deeply. Not out of shock, but because he knew that what came next was no longer just an investigation. It was a criminal case, fully formed and ready for court. Meanwhile, Vanessa continued living as though nothing had happened. She posted photos on social media, went out with friends, even scheduled a paint job for the bedroom to brighten things up. To outsiders, she was the strong widow moving forward. To the police, She was a ghost wearing the skin of a grieving wife. But what caught Colin's attention even more was Tyrone's change in behavior. He began avoiding Vanessa, took different streets when he saw her outside, stopped replying to her texts. No more heart emojis. No more late night, I miss you messages. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he was preparing to flip. So Collins made his move. Tyrone was summoned again, not for a casual chat this time, but under formal interrogation with a lawyer present. In interview room 3, Collins slid a photograph across the table. It was the burnt tooth. Tyrone stared at it, eyes twitching. "We have the DNA," Collins said. "We have the truck's route. A witness saw your vehicle near Vanessa's house that night. And a camera at a car wash caught your license plate, clear as day." Tyrone said nothing, but sweat had begun soaking through the collar of his shirt. "She already gave us a statement, Tyrone," Collins continued, voice low and deliberate. "She says you did everything, that you tricked her, that you were the one who took David's body to the furnace." Silence, then a dry, bitter laugh. "So she flipped first?" he asked. "She always moves first," Collins replied. Tyrone looked him dead in the eye. Then he lowered his head to the table. And just like that, the first words of his confession began to pour onto the record. Vanessa was picking out new curtains when the police arrived. She was standing in a home decor store, holding a cream-colored fabric swatch up to the light to see if it matched the walls, when a deep voice sounded behind her. "Vanessa Price? You're under arrest for suspicion of first-degree murder." She turned. A brief flicker of surprise crossed her face. No screaming, no panic, just a tight-lipped pause. And then, as if someone had whispered the line to her, she asked calmly, "Is there some kind of mistake?" 3 officers approached. One handcuffed her. Shoppers began recording the scene on their phones, eyes filled with curiosity and quiet fear. Vanessa stood still, back straight, eyes steady. Even as she was placed in the back of a squad car, she didn't cry or struggle. Instead, she smiled, a faint, chilling smile. At the police station, Detective Collins waited in interrogation room 4. When Vanessa entered, he saw what he'd seen in dozens of women before her: beauty, confidence, and the belief that she could outsmart everyone. "Good evening, Mrs. Price," Collins said. "Detective," she replied, sitting down with her cuffed hands resting on the table. "I'd like to speak with a lawyer." "Of course. But before he arrives, there are a few things I think you should see." He slid a slim folder across the table. Inside, a photo of the burned tooth, GPS tracking records from Tyrone's truck, time-stamped camera footage of the vehicle's route, and finally, an excerpt from Tyrone Mill's first written confession. Vanessa flipped through the pages without blinking. "Seems he's being very cooperative," she said evenly. "I'm guessing he threw me under the bus already, didn't he?" "We never said that," Collins replied, watching her face carefully. "You're the one saying it now." She looked up, lips tightening. 1 second passed. Then she leaned back in the chair, eyes drifting toward the ceiling. "You people don't get it," she whispered. "I didn't kill David for the money. I killed him because I was tired of living someone else's life." Collins tilted his head. "And whose life was worth living?" "Mine," Vanessa said. "I wasn't born to be dinner on the table for some nice, boring man. I was born to choose who I want, do what I want, and live the way I want." That evening's local news aired footage of Vanessa being taken into custody. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes cold, her face unreadable. The town of Montgomery was in shock. They had once seen her as gentle, kind, David's devoted wife. Now all anyone could remember was her smile and handcuffs. Tyrone sat in the interrogation room, hands flat on the table, staring at the statement he had just signed. Gone was the confident, flirtatious man the neighbors once whispered about. What sat there now looked like a man crushed between survival and self-destruction. Detective Collins entered, carrying a cup of hot coffee. He placed it in front of Tyrone and sat down across from him, saying nothing. There was no need. The look they exchanged said everything. The game was over. "She started all of it," Tyrone began, after a long silence. "She knew I'd been in prison, knew I was broke, knew I could be controlled. At first, it was just sex. Then she told me David was cheating on her. that she was hurting, that she needed to be freed. You believed her? Collins asked. At first, yeah. She cried, begged, told me about her miscarriages. I thought I was saving a trapped woman. And then? Then she told me the number. Tyrone said, eyes closed. 750 grand. And I knew. I couldn't turn back. Tyrone's confession unraveled the entire web. He detailed how Vanessa convinced David to sign the life insurance policy, how she mapped out his schedule to pick the perfect night, how she was the one who drugged the wine, how she sent the text that summoned Tyrone, and how she stood silently as David was bludgeoned to death. She didn't cry, didn't even blink. It was like she was watching a movie she'd seen before. Tyrone said, his voice thin. Collins took it all in, stone-faced. No interruptions, no reactions. But in his mind, Vanessa's portrait was taking final shape. Not just a manipulative wife, but a social predator expertly exploiting the weaknesses of men for one purpose: control. Why confess now? Collins finally asked. Tyrone met his eyes. Because if I stay quiet, she walks free. She always finds a way to make herself the victim. If I don't talk, I die. And she smiles her way through prison. You scared of her? Tyrone gave a bitter laugh. I love her once, but now I just want to make sure she never walks out again. Collins nodded. He stood, collecting the folder. The interrogation was over, but the legal war was about to begin. And this time, Vanessa wouldn't be the one writing the script. May 2015. The State Criminal Court of Montgomery was packed. Reporters, journalists, victim advocacy groups, and curious onlookers crowded around the iron gates outside. Many held handmade signs. Justice for David. She smiled while he burned. Vanessa stepped out of the transport van, dressed in an orange prison jumpsuit, her hands cuffed, but her posture unfazed, her walk deliberate, like a model striding onto a runway. On her face, there was no fear, only calculation. She knew the spotlight was on her. And like always, she chose to play the lead. The trial began with the prosecutor's opening statement. This is not just a murder case. This is a production, a play written, directed, and performed by the defendant, a woman who not only killed her husband, but manipulated someone else into doing the dirty work. She did not act in rage. She acted with precision and control. The jury sat in stunned silence. Witnesses were called one by one. First, Mrs. Jenkins, the neighbor, who testified about the black pickup truck parked outside that night, the strange looks exchanged at the house party, and a cold shiver she couldn't quite explain. Next, the forensic technician, who confirmed that the burned tooth recovered from the scrapyard belonged to David Price. Then came Tyrone. His testimony was the final blade, slicing clean through Vanessa's carefully constructed mask. He told everything: how she lied, seduced him, plotted the murder, and stood by as her husband was beaten and burned, as if it were just a scene in a film. Vanessa didn't flinch, didn't nod, didn't deny. She just sat there, like she was waiting for her cue to strike back. Her defense attorney, a man named Charles Dillard, tried to recast Vanessa as a manipulated woman, living in fear and traumatized by multiple miscarriages. But his voice trembled against the tide of evidence, the files, the testimonies, the cold clinical forensic data that painted a story no sentiment could undo. The press dubbed it the coldest trial of the decade. On the 10th day, as the prosecution gave their closing remarks, the lead attorney turned to the jury and said, "We cannot let a dishonest smile bury the ashes of truth. The man who burned in that furnace can no longer speak. But we must speak for him. And if justice still matters, then we must call this what it is: cold-blooded murder." The courtroom was silent. Vanessa remained still. But beneath the table, her hands, once so composed, were clenched tight. 3 days after closing arguments, the jury took less than 4 hours to reach a verdict. The courtroom was packed on sentencing day. David Price was gone, but his parents sat in the front row, holding hands tightly. Many residents from the town showed up, not out of curiosity, but because they needed to witness that justice had not forgotten evil. The judge held the verdict in hand and read it slowly, deliberately. The defendant, Vanessa Price, is found guilty of first-degree murder. Sentence: death by lethal injection. Silence fell over the room. Some cried. David's mother covered her face, weeping softly. His father gave a subtle nod, as if he had just watched his son's spirit return from the flames. Vanessa did not blink. She did not plead. She did not protest. She didn't even look around the room. But for the first time, her eyes were empty. No more performances. No more directing. Just the cold weight of sentence and a death waiting at the end of the West Wing corridor. The women's death row unit at Westgate Prison, Alabama, held no future, only time counting backward toward death. Vanessa Price was placed in Unit E1, a solitary block reserved for inmates sentenced to die. She was allowed out of her cell 1 hour a day. No contact, no cellmates, no one to seduce, manipulate, or deceive. At least not in theory. Within 2 weeks, Vanessa had adapted as if she were born behind concrete walls and razor wire. She ate her meals on schedule, caused no disruptions, showed no fear or anger. But those who watched her closely, like Lieutenant Walker, a white correctional officer in his 40s, knew something wasn't right. Every time she stepped into the yard, her eyes didn't scan the ground or sky. They studied people, studied structure, measured distances. She wasn't walking to relax. She was tracking camera angles, memorizing patrol routes, observing guard rotation patterns. Most inmates on death row surrendered to time. But Vanessa wasn't like most. She was looking for a door. Lieutenant Walker was the first to feel that gaze, the same gaze that had once captivated Tyrone, disarmed police officers, and nearly swayed an entire jury. But he wasn't like the others. Once, as he escorted her to the yard, Vanessa turned and whispered, "Aren't you curious why someone like me would do something like that?" Walker barely glanced at her and replied dryly, "I'm not a psychologist. I just bring you to the sun and take you back to the dark." That answer silenced her. But in her mind, a new plan began to form. If she couldn't manipulate him, she'd find someone else, someone easier to bend. Weeks later, Vanessa submitted a handwritten request to join a community labor rehabilitation program, a privilege nearly never granted to death row inmates. She wrote carefully, citing reasons like a desire to reconnect with society and one final opportunity to serve before dying. The request was denied, but she wasn't disappointed, because her goal wasn't freedom, it was contact, leverage, opportunity. Then she noticed Greg Tatum, a male inmate transferred to Westgate for internal repair work, plumbing, electrical maintenance, surveillance systems. Greg was tall, white, athletic, a former track star with sharp eyes and few words. Vanessa saw him as a gift, strong, quiet, and maybe, just maybe, more pliable than Walker. One day, when Greg was assigned to check a water line near the death row yard, Vanessa was coincidentally scheduled for her outdoor hour at the same time. She stood near the fence, fingers brushing the steel bars, and whispered, "If I die here without leaving something behind, what a waste, don't you think?" Greg didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. And that was enough. Vanessa knew a new game had begun. Vanessa knew one fact with absolute clarity. Executing a pregnant woman was nearly impossible under Alabama law. If a death row inmate was found to be pregnant, the sentence would be indefinitely postponed, at least until the child was born and placed with a legal guardian. And that was the final key Vanessa held. She didn't need a pardon. She didn't need freedom. She just needed to buy time, delay death, and if lucky, become the mother of an innocent child in the public eye. The plan began in the prison infirmary. The supervising doctor was Marla Chambers, a no-nonsense woman who'd once served in Iraq as a military medic. Now she ran medical checks for Westgate's female inmates. She wasn't easily manipulated, but Vanessa didn't need Marla to believe her. She just needed the system to believe her. Vanessa started reporting symptoms: stomach cramps, morning nausea, dizziness. She ate less, looked pale, spoke softly. After 3 consecutive days, she was referred to the infirmary for testing. "Do you think you're pregnant?" Marla asked. Vanessa lowered her eyes and whispered, "I'm not sure, but something feels different." Marla narrowed her eyes behind her glasses, skeptical. But protocol required that any female inmate with possible symptoms be tested. Vanessa smiled to herself. Step 1, planting medical suspicion, was complete. Step 2, acquiring the sperm. Vanessa knew male-female inmate contact was nearly impossible. But Greg, the inmate she'd been quietly grooming, was her target. One day, when Greg was assigned to repair a leaky pipe near death row, Vanessa accidentally spilled her meal tray, triggering a sanitation call. Greg was brought into the kitchen near the infirmary for 15 minutes. Vanessa stood at her cell door, eyes locked through the bars. As Greg passed, she said, "If you help me, I'll make sure your child never grows up in the dark." Greg paused, said nothing, but the next day, he slipped a small package through the crack in her door, a used condom tied off in a plastic bag. Vanessa held it in trembling hands, not from disgust, but because the game had entered its end phase. Step 3, making the sample count. She hid the packet inside a rolled sanitary napkin, then feigned light bleeding and requested a trip to the infirmary. Marla had no idea that the item she'd received could overturn a state-sanctioned execution. 2 days later, Vanessa was called in again. Marla looked at her, holding a folder, hesitant. Strangely, the test came back positive. I'm pregnant," Vanessa whispered, eyes widening just enough to appear shocked. "We'll need to run an ultrasound, but under current policy, your execution will be put on hold." Vanessa lowered her head, exhaled deeply, as if unsure whether to cry or smile. But as she walked back to her cell, her footsteps were calm, steady, like she was walking across an invisible stage. Each step one by one, away from death row. The news traveled faster than anything that had ever moved through Westgate Prison. A female death row inmate was pregnant. Within 72 hours of Marla Chambers filing her medical report, the name Vanessa Price was back in the headlines, but not for murder. This time, the bold font titles read, "Death Row Killer is Pregnant. Should her execution be halted?" A media storm erupted. News anchors debated it. Podcasts picked it apart. Social media overflowed with comments. One side cried, "Protect the life of the unborn child." The other raged, "Don't let a murderer weaponize a fetus to escape justice." Some called her a pregnant serpent. Others called her the last mother. Oddly, much of the public stopped talking about David Price, the husband who had been burned alive, and began fixating on Vanessa's barely visible belly. Inside the prison, the directive from above was crystal clear. The execution was suspended indefinitely. Vanessa was moved to a special observation unit for pregnant inmates. She was allowed more movement, assigned a dedicated nurse for health checks, received enhanced nutrition, and most importantly, stepped out of the shadow of death, at least for 9 months. Vanessa didn't celebrate, but each night, as she lay on her cold metal bed, she placed a hand on her still flat stomach and whispered, "Thank you, baby. You saved me. And if I'm smart enough, I'll save us both." At the state attorney's office, the real war began. On one side, the same prosecutors who secured her conviction were now demanding an investigation. How had Vanessa gotten pregnant in solitary confinement? On the other, human rights attorneys were pushing back, calling the inquiry an invasion of privacy against a pregnant inmate. Even state politicians began weaponizing the case for political gain, posting images of Vanessa with captions like, "Who will protect this innocent life when the justice system just wants blood?" Marla Chambers, the prison nurse who knew something was off, tried to raise alarms. She requested further testing, but the administration denied it. You can't question a pregnancy just because you feel something's wrong. Marla began journaling every anomaly in a small notebook, hidden in her private drawer, because she knew one day the truth would need a witness. Meanwhile, Vanessa was living like a woman reborn. She ate on schedule, wrote in a pregnancy journal as part of a rehabilitation program. Each page was cataloged by the prison, until one young guard snapped photos of a few entries and leaked them online. One passage read, "I don't know if I deserve to live, but I know there's a life inside me that didn't choose this. I must protect it because it is not me." The post went viral. Thousands cried. Public opinion began to shift. Vanessa was no longer the death row killer. She became the expecting mother behind bars. No one knew that the woman writing those lines was the finest actress on a stage with no audience. Vanessa wasn't remorseful. She was rewriting the script. And this time, her lead role was a mother abandoned by a cold, heartless system. February 12, 2016. In a cold, sterile room inside Westgate Prison, Vanessa Price gave birth. The baby was delivered between concrete walls and flickering fluorescent lights. There were no family members present, no congratulations, only the thin, piercing cry of a newborn echoing off stone. A sound like a bell tolling. This story wasn't over yet. It was a boy, weighing 6.4 pounds. Healthy. Vanessa named him Isaiah, after the prophet from the Bible. She whispered to the nurse who was still wiping blood from her arms. "He's life among ashes and flesh." The media exploded. Headlines read, "Death row inmate Vanessa Price gives birth to baby boy." A leaked, blurry photo showed her holding the child. Her eyes dry, no tears, just a calm, almost victorious expression. TV pundits debated for days. Who would raise the child? Did Vanessa still have the right to be a mother? Whose name would the baby carry? And most importantly, does the state have the right to execute the mother of a newborn? Alabama's Child Protection Services stepped in. 3 legal options were proposed. Place the child with David Price's family, the man Vanessa had murdered. Assign the child to a vetted, anonymous adoptive family to shield him from the media. Allow Vanessa to raise the child in prison for the first 12 to 18 months, under special regulations for death row inmates with infants, in a highly supervised program. A closed-door hearing was held. In a small courtroom with no cameras, Vanessa appeared in her prison uniform, hands uncuffed, standing before a middle-aged judge. Across the room sat David's mother, once the woman who had called Vanessa daughter. She stood, her voice trembling. "I cannot let my grandson be raised by the woman who burned my son's body." Vanessa said nothing. She only lowered her eyes and gently held Isaiah, asleep in her arms, unaware the world was deciding his fate. The final ruling. Vanessa would be allowed to care for Isaiah for the first 12 months. After that, custody would transfer to David's family if deemed fit. Vanessa would not be permitted to see her child again following the transfer. Back in her cell, time no longer ticked toward execution. It now counted down to separation. Vanessa began to change. She woke up earlier, breastfed, changed diapers. She hummed lullabies she once hated. Each night, she wrote in a journal addressed to Isaiah, "If you grow up and ever read this, know that I'm not a good person. But I did one good thing in this life. I kept you alive." Outside, public opinion remained fiercely divided. One side called for her sentence to be overturned, claiming every child needs their mother. The other side condemned her. She was using an innocent life as a shield. The media gave Isaiah a nickname, the prison baby. He became a symbol of mercy, of manipulation, of debate, while still unable to speak a single word. Vanessa knew all of it and said nothing. No interviews, no appeals, no protests, only care, because she understood. The fewer the words, the more people imagine. And in imagination, she still lived. 1 year passed. On Monday morning, February 13th, 2017, Westgate Prison returned to its usual routine, except for one thing. Isaiah was no longer in the death row wing. At 7 a.m., a social worker arrived. A nurse gently took the child from Vanessa's arms, just 1 year old, not yet able to say the word mama. Vanessa didn't cry. She simply stared at the soft, blue blanket wrapped around her son, the color she had chosen on his birth paperwork. Isaiah was handed to his paternal grandmother, David Price's mother, as ordered by the court. The woman said nothing to Vanessa. She simply bowed her head slightly, as if saying goodbye, not to her former daughter-in-law, but to a once beautiful memory now turned to ash. The media was barred from reporting on the handoff, but one photo leaked. Vanessa standing behind a barred window, her hand resting on the glass, watching a silver sedan drive away through the prison gate. No one saw her face, only her shadow on the wall, thin, unmoving but upright. In the weeks that followed, Vanessa returned to her solitary cell in the death row unit. No more baby cries, no more privileges. Each day, she was let out for exactly 1 hour of yard time, then brought back in. To the guard's surprise, she didn't act out. She didn't fall into depression. She didn't scream. She lived in quiet rhythm, as if the sentence no longer mattered, as if she were waiting for something else. In a state crime lab, an old file was reopened. A female forensic analyst, who happened to read an old blog about Vanessa's case, discovered a discrepancy in the biological evidence. The condom sample submitted to the infirmary was never DNA tested. The sample had since been destroyed. No one had ever confirmed Greg was the biological father, and no one wanted to ask anymore, because the child had become a symbol, and no one touches a symbol once it's been mourned. In a private interview, Marla Chambers, the nurse who had cared for Vanessa, finally spoke up. I always suspected her, but no one listened. I don't know how she got pregnant, but she was smart. She knew the system's weaknesses, and she used a child to bend justice. 2 years later, a book was published titled, She Was Never the Victim. The author, a journalist who had followed the case from the start, didn't accuse or absolve Vanessa. He simply analyzed her as a complex social construct, a brilliant black woman raised in poverty who understood how the system saw her and chose to survive by playing it from within. The book caused a storm. Critics accused the author of romanticizing a killer. Others hailed Vanessa as a woman who understood law better than her own lawyers. Vanessa Price is still alive. Her execution date has not been set, as the state continues reviewing death penalty policy for inmates who've given birth. She has said nothing. No interviews, no appeals, no request to see her child again. She continues to write in her journal. The last time Marla saw her, Vanessa was writing on a small piece of paper, her handwriting neat, elegant, as if trained for years. One entry read, I don't know who will tell my story the right way, but if my son grows up and asks, who was my mother? I hope no one says she was a monster. Just tell him she chose to survive, no matter the cost. Outside, Isaiah grows up in a quiet home. He knows nothing about his mother, nothing about the burnt tooth, the murder, or the calculated stare behind prison bars. But maybe one day, when he finds the documents, the news archives, the books, he'll ask himself, was I proof of life, or a tool that helped someone step down from the gallows?